It's time to dream his dreams. It's time to think his thoughts, to adjust our values to what he values. We sometimes become satisfied with mirroring something that's similar, but it's not the same. He said that you would ensure salvation for yourself and for everyone who hears you talk. So here I want you to look at the challenge. It's all the way through the book of 1 Timothy, but we're going to start in chapter 1, and I'm just going to pick out certain verses just because I want it to be clear in our thinking before we get into the process that God's invited us into. Verse 4 says, don't give heed to fables, endless genealogies which cause disputes rather than godly edification, which is in faith. Verse 5, the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith, which some having strayed have turned aside to idle talk. Do you hear what's being read here? Idle talk was a tool to disengage a person from a relationship with God and discovering why they were alive. Meaningless conversation. I'm not saying we don't play around and talk about the weather. We're talking about values that change the affection of the heart, the target of the affection of the heart. And Paul is giving a warning to a group of people that get wrapped up in conversation about the endless genealogies, that this qualifies you for this and this qualifies, all this stuff that just gets talked about sometimes in Christendom, that is just vain babbling. And he's saying, listen, it wars with the affection of your heart. And there's something profound about God revealing to you and me identity, purpose, destiny, and outcome or intended impact of our life. There's something about understanding what it is God has intended for us. And so every parent we've been summoned into this role to build a sense of identity into our children, our grandchildren. We hit this day after day after day. And in that, we identify purpose. This is why you're alive. The giftings that are in you were breathed in you by God himself. And these are the things that God has given you to do, to flourish in. All of this is important because you have a destiny. You have an intended destiny. But the destiny isn't the reason. It's the impact. It's that all would be saved. And so the Lord describes this life of abundance for us because of his heart to bring us into a place of sanctified affections where we are truly anchored into our reason for being. It's interesting to me, we come to the end of Timothy, and I'm jumping ahead of the story, but it just fits in here for me. At the end of the story, Paul says this. He says, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty nor trust in uncertain riches, but instead in the living God who richly gives us all things to enjoy. Interesting verse. So let's walk through it. He says, tell those who are wealthy not to set their affections on the uncertainty of riches. It's unstable. It's not worthy of their affections. Their trust needs to be in God himself. And then it says, who richly gives us all things to be enjoyed. So it wasn't a statement to drive us to poverty. It was a statement to drive us to purpose. It's a statement, it's a revelation of purpose that is to drive us to connection. Because there's something about this passage. He says, it's the Lord who gives you these things. Here's the challenge. When God puts blessing in my life, if it does not endear me to him, then that blessing ends in that moment. But when it endears me to him, in other words, I see this as coming from his hand, from his favor in my life. My affection for him increases. My devotion for him becomes more refined and focused. What happens is I'm drawn to him from the blessing. Now the blessing can continue to increase. But the moment the blessing ends with me just enjoying a moment, a favor, an income, an increase, an open door, and it's all about me, the lifespan of that blessing ends in that moment. Proverbs puts it this way. He says, the Lord adds blessing to our life and he adds no sorrow to it. In other words, he gives us income without income tax.